The preacher's words still echoed in the wind as the young woman stood beside him, barefoot, bruised and trembling beneath a sun-bleached bonnet. The sale had been made. $19 for a 19-year-old girl. Her father didn't even stay to shake the buyer's hand. Cole Hunter, a widower with nothing left but a patch of land and a grave under the cottonwood tree, had just bought himself a stranger. And as the townsfolk muttered behind their hands, and the sheriff pretended not to see the girl's torn sleeve, Cole could only stare at the dust cloud where her parents' wagon had disappeared. She wouldn't look him in the eye. Not then. Not even when thunder cracked above the church roof and she whispered something he couldn't quite hear. It sounded like, "Don't let them find me. Before we jump back in, introduce yourself and let me know where you're tuning in from, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss how this story unfolds, because what started as a desperate man's choice turned into a fight for a girl's life and a past neither of them saw coming. They said the girl was cursed. Not out loud, of course, not in front of her face, but in Whisper Hollow, nothing stayed quiet for long. Except her. The town itself was a tired stretch of broken fences and peeling paint, the kind of place where wagons groaned louder than folks did, and everybody knew who swept whose porch, who skipped Sunday service, and who didn't belong. She'd arrived 3 summers ago, riding in the back of a peddler's wagon beside a wooden crate and a goat. Her mother didn't say much. Her father said too much. Folks remembered that. Said she never looked up once, not even when the peddler stopped to water the mule. Now at 19 she wandered through town like a shadow. A clean one, quiet, always covered. Dust clung to her skirts, same as it did the rest of them, but there was something different in her step. Just enough of a limp to slow her gait, not enough to justify asking. Not that anyone would have dared. There were stories, of course. They grew out of boredom like weeds in dry soil. Some said she was deaf, others said mute. Some swore they'd heard her singing to herself near the dry creek bed. But when they stepped closer, she vanished like smoke. A few of the older men at the saloon said she was married once, to a boy who died out on the bluff. Others nodded, and added that her own mother had been seen crying outside the blacksmith's, and her father hadn't let her out of the house for weeks after that. Still, she came into town once a week, always alone, always near closing time, just before the sun slid behind the canyon and the boardwalks emptied. She'd pick up flour, thread, maybe a pouch of tea if they hadn't run out again. She paid in exact coins, never spoke unless forced. And she never met anyone's eyes, especially not the men's. No one asked her name anymore. It had been spoken once in the church register, but over time it faded, like so many things in Whisper Hollow. The scar beneath her jaw was barely visible now, but those who saw it once never forgot it. A curved line, pale and tight, like someone had tried to silence her once and nearly succeeded. The limp came after the fire, or so they said. No one saw it happen. But folks noticed the burn marks on her boots and the way her fingers curled slightly when she carried her basket. Some figured it was punishment. Others figured she brought it on herself. She lived in the outer edge of town, in a slanted house with a rusted roof and 2 wild dogs that never barked. Her mother used to sit on the porch with a rifle across her lap. Her father rarely came into town unless it was to collect payment for odd jobs, mostly fencing, sometimes coal deliveries, and once when the sheriff was sick to clean out the jailhouse. That was the day the rumors about the girl changed. A boy swore he saw her tied to the back fence. He said she looked dead. Another girl, half drunk and half lying, said she heard her scream. But when they sent the reverend out to check, all he found was an empty swing and a water bucket tipped in the dust. Nothing more came of it. Nothing ever did. The girl stopped coming into town for nearly a month after that. Then one day, just like always, there she was, walking slow, head low, carrying a folded list in her hand. No one dared stop her, not even the curious ones, not until the day her father nailed a sign to the telegraph post. Marriage arrangement available. Age 19. Domestic, healthy, obedient. Inquire within. It stayed up for 3 days. On the 4th, it rained. By morning, the ink had bled and the wind had peeled the paper off the post. Most folks figured it was just drunken nonsense. Others weren't so sure. A few men did, in fact, inquire. Quietly. Discreetly. She didn't show her face for another week. When she finally did, her bonnet was gone. Her hair was braided too tight, and the edge of her left cheek looked swollen. She didn't limp that day. She barely moved, just stood there in the middle of the mercantile, arms full of sugar, rice, and matches, and stared at the counter like she was trying to memorize it. She placed each item down with care. Her lips moved. No sound came. Then she placed a single silver dollar on the wood and turned away. That was the last time anyone saw her outside her father's wagon. Before we dive into the rest of the story, just a quick note. I'm Thomas, the voice behind this narration. If you enjoy how it sounds, let me know in the comments so we can keep the same voice in future videos. That same week, the widower returned. Cole Hunter, 36. 2 years widowed, hands like saddle leather, eyes like riverstone. He hadn't spoken more than a dozen words since his wife passed during childbirth, most of them to his horses. Folks knew he worked hard. They also knew he hadn't smiled in months. So when they saw him walking out past the edge of town that morning, folks assumed he was delivering feed or heading to the ridge to fix his broken gate. No one expected him to return at dusk, with a girl in his wagon. She sat beside him, shoulders hunched, her hands folded neatly in her lap like she didn't know what to do with them. She wore a pale blue dress, clean, patched at the hem. Her mother's bonnet shaded her eyes. But those who looked close swore they saw something else, a tear in her sleeve, blood on her knuckles, a bruise on her collarbone that hadn't been there before. Cole didn't speak when they passed. Didn't look left or right. Just drove straight. Through, heading toward the chapel. Some say it was mercy. Others said madness. But one thing was clear. The girl no longer belonged to the house on the edge of town, and no one, not even the preacher, knew what price he paid for her. The wind changed the day she moved into the widower's house. Not just the air itself, which carried the dry smell of distant fire, but the rhythm of things. The silence wasn't so heavy anymore. Not gone, but different. Less like a shroud. More like a pause. Cole Hunter had lived alone for too long. His cabin sat just past the wheat fields, a short ride from the old bluff where his wife and son lay buried beneath 2 sun-bleached stones. He'd built the porch with his own hands, stacked the chimney brick by brick, and never once let a woman step inside since the funeral. Until her. She didn't speak much, but she cleaned the windows on the first morning, scrubbed the floors on the second, cooked something warm by the third. Cole didn't ask her to, didn't stop her either. He noticed the limp when she walked to the barn, favoring her right side when she lifted the water pail. He noticed the scar, too, when the sun hit her cheek just right, a pale white slash beneath her jaw that looked like it had been stitched up in the dark. He never asked about it. He did ask her name once. She didn't answer, just turned her head, and mumbled something into her shoulder, so he called her Miss, and she didn't correct him. Sometimes she sat on the porch in the evenings, her skirt tucked around her knees, fingers weaving thread through the torn edge of a curtain or a worn-out hem. Cole would sit beside her, not close, just there, with his coffee mug and a cigar he never lit. They didn't speak much, but the silence was different than the one she came from. It wasn't heavy or sharp. It just was. That was enough, the moi. First time she looked him in the eye, it was over a broken dish. It had slipped from her hand, shattering against the stove. She froze, rigid, pale, hands trembling as if waiting for something worse to follow. Cole had looked at her, not the floor, and said calmly, "We've got plenty of dishes." She blinked. He stepped forward to grab the broom, and she backed, into the wall like he might strike her. That's when he realized she wasn't afraid of the accident. She was afraid of him, so he handed her the broom instead, slow, careful. She took it, eyes still wide, and for the first time, just a moment, she met his gaze. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The town, however, didn't think much of starts. The gossips twisted themselves in knots over it. Widow Cole, buying himself a girl whose father practically sold her on the street. They spoke in low tones over sewing circles and behind church pews. The sheriff stopped by once, uninvited, just to check on things. Cole offered him coffee in silence. The girl stayed out back. After that, the visit stopped. But the whispers didn't. And still, the girl stayed. It was 3 weeks before they had their first real conversation. He was fixing the fence. She brought him water in a tin cup, her hands red from washing. She watched him hammer for a long while, then said softly, "That post's not straight." Cole paused, looked up. "No," he agreed. "You're right." She blinked, surprised he hadn't snapped at her. Then she pointed. "You need to shift the anchor. It leans left." He smiled, just slightly. "Come show me." She hesitated, then stepped forward, bare feet on cracked earth, and for the first time since she arrived, she smiled back. It wasn't much, but it wasn't nothing. That night, she sat beside him on the porch without sewing. The stars came out early, bright against the black sky. Crickets chirped. The dogs lay curled beneath the steps, breathing slow and even. And in the quiet, she whispered, "My name's Lottie." He looked at her, nodded once. "Mine's Cole." She gave a small laugh, the kind that sounded like she hadn't used it in a long time. "I know," she said. They sat that way for a while, the quiet stretched between them like a thread. Then she asked, "Why'd you come?" He didn't answer right away. Just stared out at the horizon, where the wheat field moved like ocean water in the wind. "Didn't feel right," he said. Her father, that sign. The way folks looked at her. I knew that look. Lottie turned to him. "From your wife?" He nodded. "She died screaming, and no one came to help." Lottie didn't respond. She just reached down and rested her hand near his, not touching, just close enough that he could feel the warmth of it. Sometimes, silence said more. The next morning, danger arrived. It came in the form of a man named Burke Kincaid, a drifter, with a bad eye and worse intentions. He'd ridden into town on a black horse, drunk and loud, asking about a girl with a scar and a father who owed him coin. Said she belonged to him now. The sheriff told him to move along, but Kincaid just grinned and said he'd wait. Waited 2 days, camped near the river, smoking and sharpening a knife by firelight. Lottie heard about it from the storekeeper's son, who ran all the way to Cole's property after school. She didn't cry, didn't speak. She just stood on the porch that evening, staring out at the road like it might rise up and swallow her whole. Cole came out and handed her a rifle. "Just in case," he said. She took it with shaking hands, but she took it. The days passed slower after that. Cole worked with one eye on the horizon. Lottie stayed close to the house, the dogs more alert, the air heavier. Kincaid didn't leave. He didn't come either. Just waited. Then, one night, as the wind picked up and the lanterns swayed on their hooks, Lottie finally broke the silence. "He wasn't just a friend of my father's," she said, standing in the doorway. "He was the one they promised me to." Cole didn't move. They said I'd been too much trouble, too wild, that he'd teach me how to behave. Cole clenched his jaw. "Did he?" She shook her head. "Almost." She looked out into the dark. "I burned his hand with the kettle. My father beat me for that, but my mother, she helped me hide. She made me run." Cole stepped closer. "You're not going back." Lottie turned to him, her eyes glassy. "I don't want to run anymore." "You won't." And in that moment, with the wind howling and the boards creaking beneath their feet, something shifted between them. Something real and quiet and solid. Not love. Not yet. But something like it. Something worth protecting. They warned her he'd come. Burke Kincaid wasn't a man to wait long without making someone bleed. And after a week of lying low in his tent outside town, he finally made his move, only it wasn't loud, or violent, or even direct. It was legal. He showed up with a paper, a crude handwritten contract, witnessed by no one reputable but sealed with her father's name. "Transfer of guardianship," he said, grinning from beneath his crooked hat. "Girl was promised. I got claim. He shoved it under the sheriff's nose, standing in the middle of town with a snake oil salesman's swagger and a belt full of polished bullets. He didn't even glance at Lottie, who was crouched behind a rain barrel, breath caught like a knife in her chest. She didn't need to read the paper. She recognized the handwriting. Her father had given her away. Again. The sheriff didn't want trouble. He said it wasn't binding, said Cole had married her fair and quiet, that the preacher signed the book himself. But Burke didn't leave. He followed her home the next day, shouting from the road. He left a noose hanging from the fence post that night, tied loose and swinging in the wind. Lottie didn't sleep, and in the morning she was gone. She didn't leave a note. Just her apron on the kitchen hook and a broken jar of preserves on the back steps. Glass scattered like teeth in the dirt. One of the dogs followed her halfway through the field before turning back, whimpering. Cole found the boot prints near the south trail. She had run. The sky dropped snow early that year. Flakes clung to the prairie grass like ash. The cold bit hard, dry and fast. Cole saddled his horse without speaking. He didn't tell the sheriff, didn't ask the preacher. He just rode and found her. 3 miles out, huddled beneath a rock overhang, knees drawn to her chest, face hidden in her arms. Her boots were soaked, her fingers blue. The thin shawl around her shoulders hung limp and useless. She didn't look up when he approached, didn't move when he dismounted. He knelt beside her in the snow, the wind moaning low through the canyon. "I'm not here to take you back," he said softly. Still, she didn't move. He didn't touch her, didn't ask questions, just sat beside her, his coat pulled around them both, his body blocking the worst of the wind. They sat like that until her shivering slowed, until she whispered, "He'll never stop." "I know. I thought if I stayed quiet, they'd forget. Or if I behaved," she broke off, her voice cracking. "I was a debt," she choked. "To my father, to that man, even my mother. She told me to run, but she didn't come with me. I don't even know if she's alive." Cole's jaw tensed. "You're not a debt," he said, "and you're not alone." Silence again. Long. Fragile. Then Lottie turned her face just enough that he could see her eyes. Wide. Hollow. "Why are you here?" "Because you didn't deserve any of it," he said. "And I'm tired of seeing good people left to rot." He didn't carry her back. She stood, stiff and sore, and walked beside him step by slow step. He gave her the scarf from his neck. She wrapped it with shaking hands. When they reached the horse, he helped her up gently, like she might break in two. The ride back was quiet, but she leaned against his chest. Just a little. Just enough. Back home she bathed. Warm water, soap that smelled like pine, and a clean dress from Cole's late wife's trunk. She wore it with a strange mix of reverence and grief. She didn't cry. Not until he set down a bowl of soup, slid a warm biscuit beside it, and said simply, "You don't have to talk. Just eat." That's when the tears came. Silent. Slow. He didn't move. Just sat with her, hands folded. Letting her be. Letting her fall apart without falling away. The townsfolk whispered, "Of course." Said the girl was unstable, that the widower had gotten in over his head, that maybe she had done something wrong. After all, she was always so quiet. But this time, the sheriff kept his mouth shut, and a few women, older ones, who'd seen things and survived worse, started bringing pies. Mending thread. One even brought her a little book of hymns and said, "No rush to come back to church, but you're welcome when you're ready." Lottie nodded, eyes lowered. But she kept the book. For the first time, she stayed. Outside after dark, not alone, beside Cole, on the porch with her knees tucked beneath her and a shawl wrapped tight. She didn't sew. She just sat, quiet, breathing. He whittled something in his lap. A small carving of a sparrow, simple and unfinished. She watched his hands, the way his fingers worked the blade. Firm, gentle, precise. "You don't ask questions," she said. "No. Why not? Figured you'd tell me when you're ready. She nodded, looked down. Then, I used to scream in my sleep. I know. I haven't lately. I know. Her voice wavered. Does that mean I'm better? He looked at her for a long moment. No, he said. It means you're safe. And that, more than anything, made her cry again. It was a slow recovery. Lottie didn't smile often. But sometimes, when the sun hit the field just right, or the wind carried the smell of bread through the open window, she closed her eyes and looked almost peaceful. She began to read aloud, softly, mostly to the dogs, but Cole listened from the next room. Her voice had cracks in it, but there was music under the fear. And one morning, without warning, she placed her hand on his shoulder while he poured coffee. Not out of fear, out of choice. Burke didn't disappear, but something shifted after Lottie ran. He came back into town once, red-faced and shouting. Said he'd file charges, that he'd been robbed, that she belonged to him. The sheriff met him at the edge of town with a shotgun and 3 witnesses who'd seen the fake contract. You want to fight, Burke? The sheriff said. You'll get one, but not here and not with her. Kincaid rode off in a storm of dust and curses and never came back. Months passed. Spring softened the ground. The field turned green, and Lottie, at last, asked to plant something. Not just wildflowers or kitchen herbs, but a whole plot. A garden she could tend, with roots deep enough to last through winter. She worked with her hands in the dirt, sleeves, rolled, cheeks sunburned. Cole built a fence to keep the deer out. She painted the gate herself, shaky at first, then steadier. She hung a little wooden sparrow over the latch. One evening, just after supper, she stood in the doorway, hair loose, voice stronger than it had been. Thank you, she said, for not fixing me. Cole looked up from his chair. Didn't know you were broken. She smiled. A real one this time. I used to think I was. He nodded. Me too. Then she stepped out onto the porch and sat beside him. Closed this time. No flinching. No fear. Just quiet. And care. And something unspoken growing stronger every day. They burned the old wedding dress first. Not his late wife's, hers. The thin, gray cotton thing her father had handed her the day he sold her to Burke Kincaid. The hem still held dirt from the wagon floor. The bodice had been torn once, stitched poorly, like someone meant to humiliate her even in fabric. She fed it to the fire herself, hands steady, eyes clear. Cole stood beside her, saying nothing, watching the flames eat away what was left of that life. It cracked in the hearth like brittle bones, then it was gone. That spring they started to build, not just the garden, though it bloomed wild and colorful and unruly, but something bigger, a life, a purpose, a horse ranch. It started with a mare Cole had been meaning to sell. Lottie insisted they keep her. She's got a limp, he'd said. So do I, she replied, and that was that. They cleared the far field together. Lottie wore gloves too big for her hands, and her hair stayed tied in a bandana most days. Cole rigged fencing from salvaged lumber, and she carved markers for each post. Little shapes, a pine cone, a moon, a heart. She's turning this place into a church, he joked one morning. She looked up from where she was hammering a nail, into a gate latch. Not a church, she said. A home. But the town never forgot what she'd been. The judge's wife refused to look her in the eye when they passed on Main Street. The mercantile clerk whispered with every transaction. One Sunday, someone left a bucket of pig's blood on their front steps. No note, no name. Cole was furious. Lottie just cleaned it up and never spoke of it. Until one afternoon, standing in the half-finished stable, she asked quietly, "Will they ever let me be?" He paused, then said, "No." She nodded. "But that's their burden," he added. "Not yours." And somehow that was enough to help her keep going. The ranch began to grow. A trader passed through and left 2 foals in Cole's care. One was sickly and wouldn't eat. Lottie slept in the hay beside him for 3 nights, feeding him mash from a bottle until he stood on his own. The other foal, bright-eyed and fast, followed her everywhere. She named him Bristle. Because he acts like he hates everyone, she said, stroking his muzzle. But I think he's just scared. Cole watched her, knowing she wasn't talking about the horse at all. Then came the letter. It arrived folded in thirds, scrawled in thin, shaky penmanship. No return address. She read it at the kitchen table while Cole fixed a fence outside. By the time he came back in, she was sitting still, the paper trembling between her fingers. "It's my mother," she said. Cole froze. "She's in a home, down in Georgia. Sick." He sat across from her. She said she's sorry, that she wishes she could have done more, that she left to protect me. Lottie folded the letter, slow. "She wants me to come." Cole didn't speak. "I don't know what to do," she said, and for the first time in months she looked small again, like the girl he'd found half frozen in the canyon, like someone waiting for permission to break. That night, they argued. Not loud, not cruel, just raw. "She left you," Cole said. "She didn't protect you. She let you be sold like cattle." "I know," Lottie whispered. "Then why? Why would you go?" "Because she's still my mother. Because she wrote. Because I want to hear her say it out loud." She pressed her fists against the table. "I need to know if any of it mattered. If she ever tried." Cole rubbed a hand over his jaw. He looked at her. Truly looked. At the scar under her jaw, the fire in her voice, the fear wrapped tight around her spine, and he said, "Then I'll go with you." Lottie stared at him. "No," she said. "This is mine." She left at sunrise, with Bristle hitched to a borrowed wagon and her mother's letter folded neatly in her pocket. She didn't cry when she left, and Cole didn't ask her not to go. He just pressed a small carved sparrow into her hand and said, "Come home," and she promised she would. The journey took 4 days. The weather held. The wagon didn't break. But by the time she reached the outskirts of the Georgia town, Lottie felt hollowed out. The home was small, clean. Whitewashed walls and wide porches that smelled of lemon balm and something sterile. Her mother lay in a cot near the back, gray, thin, eyes heavy-lidded with something that looked like guilt. "Lottie," she rasped. "Hello, Mama." The silence that followed was years long. They talked, or tried to. Her mother spoke in starts and stops, like someone drowning. She apologized, stammered, wept, reached for Lottie's hand. "I tried to save you," she whispered, "but I was weak." Lottie nodded. "You were. I thought if I disappeared he'd stop hurting you. He didn't." Her mother looked away. Lottie stood there for a long time, fingers clenched, until finally she said, "I forgive you." And the moment she said it, she meant it. But she also knew she couldn't stay. She returned 6 days later, thinner, quieter. The moment she stepped onto the porch, Cole stood. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "Hungry?" She nodded. He handed her a biscuit and a bowl of stew, and she cried into the first spoonful. They didn't speak of Georgia again, not because it hurt, but because she didn't need to anymore. She kept the letter. But she never reread it. She burned her mother's old scarf in the same fire where she'd burned the dress. Then she turned to Cole and said, "I want to build something permanent." That summer, they rebuilt the cabin, together. Expanded the walls, reinforced the roof. She picked out paint for the shutters, soft yellow. He carved a new porch swing. They built a proper barn, a round pen for the horses, even a guest room. "We don't know anyone who'd visit," he joked. "We might," she said. He looked at her. She looked back, and the fire between them, slow and old and steady, finally flickered to life. They didn't kiss until the first frost. Not because they hadn't wanted to, but because some fires need time to catch. It happened beneath the stars, wrapped in wool blankets on the porch swing. She leaned close to whisper something, then stopped. He turned his head, and there it was. Quiet, warm, real. When they pulled apart, she rested her head against his shoulder and whispered, "I've never felt safe like this before." And he whispered back, "Then let's keep it, but peace is never final, not in the West." And one morning Lottie found an envelope tucked into the fence post. No return, no name, just a single line in a familiar hand. "You still owe me. Burke, some debts. Don't die and some past come back burning. They say the West remembers everything, every scar, every whisper, every deal made in shadow." And when Lottie stepped onto Main Street that morning, holding the envelope from Burke Kincaid, the town remembered who she was, and it waited to see who she'd become. The saloon doors banged open just past noon. Burke stood in the center of the dusty street, older, heavier, but with the same cocked grin and eyes like coin slots. He held nothing in his hands, but the threat clung to him like smoke. Cole came out of the general store, saw him, and stilled. Burke tipped his hat. "Didn't think you'd still be here, girl," he called, loud enough for all to hear. "Thought you'd crawl off like your mother." Lottie stepped between them. Cole moved to stop her, but she raised a hand. She wasn't shaking. Not anymore. Burke pulled a crumpled paper from his pocket. "Your daddy owed me. Still does. And when he gave you to me, that made it clean. I don't much care if you burned the dress or kissed the rancher. A debt's a debt," he smirked. "Unless you'd like to settle it other ways." Gasps flickered from the townsfolk. A few windows shut. A few men stepped back, but Cole stepped forward and raised his voice for the first time. "She owes you nothing, not her name, not her life, not one breath." Burke turned to him, hand drifting toward his coat. "Easy now. No need for a mess." But Cole didn't flinch. He reached into his own coat, not for a gun, but for a folded deed. "This ranch is in her name now. Not mine, not yours. Hers." He turned, looking not at Burke, but at the townsfolk. "Let it be known," he said, "that I choose her, in daylight, in front of every eye that ever turned away." He looked at Lottie, "Not because she needs me, but because I need her." No one spoke, not the preacher, not the shopkeeper, not the judge's wife, who stood at her parlor window with trembling hands, and in that silence something cracked, not in Lottie, not in Cole, but in the town itself. Burke scoffed. He looked around, saw no one backing him, and spat. Then he turned and left. That night, it snowed for the first time in weeks. Lottie stood outside the barn, watching the flakes settle on Bristle's mane. Cole joined her, arms crossed, quiet. "You meant what you said?" she asked. He nodded. "I'll stand beside you," he said. "In town or in exile, wherever you go." Lottie looked at the ranch, the fence lines, the growing barn, the half-painted shutters, and then back at him. "I don't want to go," she whispered. He smiled. Small. "Then stay." They married under the stars. No minister, no crowd, just them, a ring carved from birchwood, and vows whispered over firelight. She wore a dress she'd sewn herself, rough linen, soft and plain. Her hair was unbound. Her smile was steady, and when he said, "I do," he looked at her like she'd hung the moon. They didn't need witnesses. The land remembered. The town softened after that. People started nodding when they passed. The blacksmith left sugar cubes for Bristle. Even the judge's wife sent a jar of pickled peaches. No one apologized, but they no longer looked away, and that was enough. Years passed. The garden grew wild. The ranch doubled. Foals were born under thunder and moonlight. Lottie carved wooden toys and kept them in a box. Until the day she didn't. They named their daughter Mary Bell, after Cole's mother, who had died too young to see what her son would become. She had Lottie's eyes and his stubbornness, and the first time she toddled barefoot into the field, Bristle followed her like a bodyguard. Lottie cried that night, not from fear, but from awe. The ranch became a place people stopped at on purpose. Travelers asked for water and stayed for supper. A widow with 3 sons came to board. A young runaway found work and rest and stayed for years. And every time someone asked how it all began, Lottie just smiled and said, with a broken girl, and a quiet man, and one hard winter that didn't kill either of them. One afternoon, long after the snow had melted for the last time that year, Cole took her hand as they sat on the porch swing. Bristle grazed in the distance. Maribel chased grasshoppers. The sky burned soft orange. "I still remember," he said, "the day I saw you at the auction." Lottie didn't flinch. He squeezed her hand. "And I remember the day I almost lost you to that canyon snow. The day I first heard you laugh, the way you smelled like rosemary when you came back from Georgia." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I remember it too," she said. And for the first time in her life, Lottie didn't wonder if she was enough. She didn't doubt the fire inside her. She didn't ask if she was safe, because she was. If you're a returning viewer, we'd love to hear from you. Just type yes in the comments so we can get a sense of how many of you keep coming back. Your support truly means the world to us.